The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 teachers in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with the Tennessee academic standards. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
Thank you for coming today. I'm Jennifer Cooper. I'm an Assistant Director over Educational Outreach and Research Initiatives at the Center for Dyslexia, and I'll be talking to you today just an overview of what Fluency is. That'll be part of the program instruction that you'll be receiving, and what some practices are that are useful in Fluency instruction and intervention. So we'll begin by taking a look at what the NRP has identified as the 5 main areas that are influential on reading comprehension. Of course, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. I think it's more useful to consider them as overlapping areas where the core of phonemic awareness contributes upstream to all of the remaining areas that are crucial for reading comprehension. And we'll take a look briefly at each one of these up till we get to fluency. So if we start with phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and to manipulate those individual sounds in our language. And this is a skill that fluent readers have and that we need in order to successfully attach letter sound knowledge or letter knowledge to sound knowledge. And so an example of that would be if you're a fluent reader and you have good phonemic awareness, you would be able to reverse the phonemes in the word enough. So e, n, and you end up with funny. Following phonemic awareness is phonics, which is the knowledge of letter sounds and the ability to apply that knowledge to decode unfamiliar words. So we have this sentence from the author of Alice in Wonderland, whose name escapes me now. "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe." So as a fluent reader, I can decode this sentence, even though I have very little idea of what the sentence means. And that's the skill that our readers need in order to read fluently and to build comprehension. Lewis Carroll, sorry, I blanked. That's followed by vocabulary, the knowledge of meanings of individual words. So if we look at that same sentence where we don't really know what each of those individual words means, and we parse it apart by word, and we Google, which is how we find out the meaning of unknown words, and we find out that brillig is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Slithy is a combination of lithe and slimy, because Lord knows those two things always go together. And that toves are badgers with smooth white fur, long hind legs, and short horns. To gyre is to go round and round. To gimble is to make holes like a gimlet, which is useful only if you know that that's a gimlet. It's a little small tool that you make holes with. And a wabe is the side of the hill. Then we can take our sentence, "'Twas brillig in the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe," and we can change it to something that we can make meaning out of. "'Twas 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the lithe and slimy badgers went round and round, making holes like a gimlet in the side of the hill." So we have to know the meaning of the words in order to get to comprehension. And then the piece of the puzzle that we'll be talking about today, of course, is fluency, which is the ability to read grade level appropriate text accurately, with ease, with reasonable speed, and with prosody. So we have accuracy in word decoding, automaticity in word decoding, and oral expression in reading as the 3 main components of fluency, and we'll take a look at an example of what a fluent reader sounds like. Hopefully the speakers will work.
Down in the dark, delicious earth, most moles are happy digging, but Wishmoley wanted more. He wished to see the world above. "Above is too big and bright for a little mole," said his mommy. "Look at your spady paws and your lovely shovelly nose. Moles are made for digging. Moles are made for under." Wishmoley tried to be a good, happy digger, but he couldn't help wondering if above was better than under.
So hopefully that time we all got a taste of Patrick Stewart reading Wishmoley, and I don't think there would be any dispute among us that that was a fluent reading of that particular page in the book Wishmoley. And so we'll be looking at Patrick Stewart as an example of a fluent reader as we go through today's presentation, basically because I think it's amusing to listen to Jean-Luc Picard read. So we've discussed that there are three aspects to fluency. We have accuracy, we have automaticity, and we have prosody, and we'll be looking at each one of those in a little more detail. So if we think about accuracy, this is where the cognitive ability of phonological awareness comes into play. Our letter knowledge, our letter to sound knowledge, and then our phoneme to grapheme correspondence. Those are all important pieces of the puzzle when it comes to being an accurate reader or correctly decoding the text. So accuracy is the correct decoding or recognition of words. That includes sight words, of course. We do have to have those letter-sound relationships. We need to be aware of syllable types and orthographic patterns that occur in our language, like knowing that trigraph, IGH, makes the long I sound. We also need to have good sight word recognition, knowing that HAVE is have, not have, according to our syllable types. And we need to use this information to generate meaning from the text. So first, we need to be able to determine that that word, L-I-G-H-T, says light. So we produce that sound in our heads subconsciously as we read. Then we need to figure out the meaning of the word. Does light mean a source of light, like a light bulb, or does light mean my weight when I step on the scale, which of course it's not. But we need to determine what light means in the context of that particular sentence. Then we need to determine the author's meaning after we've decoded the word successfully and attached meaning to it. Does the author mean the light at the end of the tunnel, or is the light the oncoming train that's about to smash into us? When we deal with inaccuracy in reading, lack of accuracy in decoding and sight word recognition disrupts our ability to comprehend the text, of course. High levels of inaccuracy cause poor levels of comprehension, but most errors affect meaning. So even minor percentages of errors will affect meaning. I think the threshold for affecting comprehension is stated widely from 95 to 97%. If you're below that threshold, then you're going to have impediments to comprehension. That's a very high level of accuracy. So if we consider the piece of puzzle or the puzzle that Wishmoley is, we talk about accuracy, we're looking at decoding the text on the page. So we have a piece of the puzzle we begin to understand, but we don't have the whole situation in mind yet. So if we look at Patrick Stewart's stats, his reading of Wishmoley, that little passage that we heard, he had 100% accuracy. So he should be able to comprehend the text that he's reading. So next we'll look at automaticity. Automaticity is underscored by the cognitive process of rapid automatic naming. So this is the retrieval issue. It's not unusual to see students who have difficulty with fluency have deficits in rapid automatic naming. They're successful at decoding the words accurately, attaching those correct phoneme grapheme correspondences to each other, but it takes them a while to do that. And so when it takes you a while to process that information, you're using more of your cognitive resources trying to get all of the pieces of the puzzle to come together to make meaning out of it. We do need to be able to decode efficiently and accurately in order to achieve automaticity as well. So we generally conceptualize automaticity as words correct per minute. That's a very easy thing to judge in the classroom on a 1-minute fluency read. And that's what a lot of our goals in terms of improvement for our students is set at. So as we talked about, automaticity does require executive functioning resources and attention. You have to be able to attend to the words on the page, and you have to be able to hold those pieces of information in your working memory. And this is also where, if we go back to accuracy, accuracy comes into play. You have to be able to pull those individual phoneme grapheme correspondences into syllables or into words in order to be an automatic reader, and that information is juggled within your working memory. Being an automatic reader facilitates construction of the text model. It allows you to remember the proposition that you read at the beginning of the paragraph and the one that you just read in the middle of the paragraph, and carry that information on to the end of the paragraph and to the next page, and to pull the storyline or the informational text to pull the meaning throughout that text. So if we look at non-automaticity, effortful decoding contributes to poor comprehension. If it is taking you a long time to accurately assign the correct word to what you've perceived in the text, then you're losing those proposition as you spend your cognitive resources in the decoding piece of it or in the retrieval piece of it, even if your decoding is accurate. And when you have automatic decoding, then those executive function and resources can be devoted to comprehension of text rather than to decoding or to word retrieval. So we know that slow, labored reading results in poorer comprehension, but it also results in failure to complete work. If you're a slow and effortful reader, it takes you longer to get through the same amount of information as it takes a typical reader or a fluent reader to get through that same information, and that may result in a loss of interest in school. If you're non-successful, then why should I try? It's very hard for me. I give up. That's not an uncommon outcome. But it also results in a reduction in reading for pleasure. And so we know that wide reading is a source of vocabulary knowledge, our main source of vocabulary knowledge. We know that wide reading contributes to our ability to comprehend text because we have more practice with engaging in text and we have more background knowledge. We've seen the scenarios that occur in written text in multiple places, and so we're making those connections between exposures, and so we don't want to see that reduction in wide reading for pleasure. So again, one of the easiest constructs for us to measure with automaticity is that words correct per minute, and I think we've probably all seen both the classroom teacher and the students in our classroom realize that the name of the game is speed. It's words correct per minute. But unfortunately, when we spend so much of our teaching time, our instructional time, and we spend so much of their cognitive resources on just getting the words out faster, we lose our focus on comprehension. And of course, that's the ultimate goal of reading. So when those pieces of the mechanics or the engine are disconnected, then we're not getting a lot of traction and we're not making the progress that we would like to see our students make towards becoming fluent readers. So if we look at Patrick Stewart's stats, we talked about his accuracy. He decoded all of those words correctly with no problem. He read at 123 words correct per minute. Anybody see a problem with that? Would you say that he was a fluent and competent reader? Hasbrook and Tyndall would not agree with you. So if we look at 8th grade norms, because that's what we have, that's what they go up to, and we compare Patrick Stewart's performance on the Hasbrook and Tyndall norms, and we can see that 123 is below the 50th percentile. It actually falls just inside of the 25th percentile. And so we would flag Jean-Luc for some reading intervention based on his words correct per minute, even though he's very clearly an articulate and fluent reader. His rate would get him flagged, and we would have to delve deeper into his reading profile. So we always need to balance our emphasis on automaticity, or words correct per minute, with also an emphasis on accurate reading, and consider that we're really looking at all three aspects of fluency when we consider whether our students are fluent readers, that words correct per minute isn't really the holy grail when it comes to reading proficiency. So now we are putting our Wishmuley puzzle together, our puzzle pieces together rather. We're building our puzzle and it's looking a little bit more like Wishmuley, and we still don't have all of the pieces in place yet. So just as a reminder of Patrick Stewart's stats, 100% accuracy, 123 words correct per minute. The next piece of the puzzle that we look at is prosody. Prosody relies on both accuracy of decoding and automaticity of decoding, but also our comprehension processes play a part in our prosody. So a fluent reader who's comprehending what they read, reads with correct intonation, correct phrasing, correct parsing of the text. They're correctly attaching the emotional state to the characters if we're reading a narrative, and they're correctly identifying descriptive phrases if we're reading informational text to the noun or to which they belong. So prosody includes pitch, stress, duration, and organization of text into meaningful phrases. We want prosodic reading to sound like speaking, and it is evidence of active comprehension processes. If you are reading a text out loud and you are putting in that appropriate intonation, appropriate pausing, you're parsing the ideas into the correct phrases, that is indicative of the fact that you understand what's going on in the text. So if we look at lack of oral expression or prosody, problematic prosody. It could be robot-like. It could be in a monotone voice. It could be dysprosodic, which means they're not putting the emphasis on the correct phrasing. So they're breaking phrases apart or ideas that go together apart. They're putting stress on part of the sentence that doesn't need stress on it. So if we think of in the English language how we generally go up and down when we're asking a question, have you seen my coat? If they're not putting that appropriate stress on their questions, or if they're not going down at the end of the sentence, if the intonation or the stress is in the wrong place, it's impeding their ability to understand what's going on. They probably don't speak that way in conversation, and so when they read that way aloud, it really is indicative of the fact that we're having some comprehension difficulties. It may be slow and choppy. It also may be too fast, which we don't often think about necessarily when we consider prosody, but as we push towards getting them towards those word correct benchmarks, it is possible that they're reading too fast. And in reading too fast, again, they're not paying attention to the phrasing, they're not paying attention to the emotion in the narrative, they're not paying attention to the details in spitting those words out as quickly as they can. I mean, we don't want that either. So lack of prosody can cause confusion in our readers due to inaccurate word grouping or expression. Lack of appropriate expression can cause poor comprehension in our readers. And so again, going back to Patrick Stewart, we put the puzzle together with prosody, and he has accuracy, and he has automaticity, and he has prosody. So he has all of the elements of fluency together as a fluent reader. So we know that fluency is important because it reliably predicts reading comprehension. However, we don't know that it's causational necessarily. And we need to always consider that as we're focusing on building our students' fluency, that we're building, again, that whole piece of the fluency puzzle, prosody, accuracy, and automaticity. We believe that fluent reading represents those underlying skills. And that's why it's correlated strongly with reading comprehension, because to be a fluent reader implies that you are also an accurate decoder. To be a fluent reader implies that you are also an automatic reader. You can retrieve those words easily and effortlessly. And to be a fluent reader implies that you're reading with correct oral expression or prosody, which means that you've got those comprehension processes online while you're reading. And so that's why we see that relationship between fluency and reading comprehension. There have been studies that have demonstrated that when we improve fluency, we can also improve reading comprehension. But again, what we're remediating generally are those underlying reading skills of accuracy and automaticity. And those gains are what's driving the improvements in reading comprehension, not just because the student is reading faster, they're understanding more. So we take a look at fluency instruction. Fluency instruction needs to be direct. So the educator teaches the skills and concepts directly to the student. It needs to be explicit. Students shouldn't be expected to infer what they're supposed to do from the reading activity. They should be specifically told what the point of the activity is, what the skill is that they're developing, what the knowledge base is. If you're practicing a specific syllable type, then it should be clear to the student that that is what you're practicing. So they're developing their skill in that particular area. And it should be systematic. It should always go from easier, simpler concepts to more challenging, more difficult concepts. If students aren't reading simple sentences well, there's no reason to stick them in a text with complex sentences and expect for them to read fluently in that. We need to achieve fluency at lower levels and push that up into increasingly more complex texts for our students. The fluency instruction should be direct, explicit, and systematic. So we know that struggling readers require that direct, explicit instruction in fluency, in reading fluency practices in order to improve their fluency. That instruction should focus on first increasing their accuracy. Accuracy should always be the first leg of fluency. We want them to be accurate readers so that they can comprehend what it is they are reading. It's very hard to make sense of the words on the page if you cannot decode them accurately. I know that's not a surprise to anybody in this room. Instruction should be balanced between rate and accuracy, and it should include modeling of prosodic reading, particularly for our students who have struggled in mastering that letter sound knowledge, that phoneme grapheme correspondence. They've spent a lot of their cognitive resources in getting that piece of the puzzle in place. And they are successful when they have decoded accurately. So they may not have spent as much time as a fluent reader or typically developing reader in practice of fluent oral reading. So they do need to see that modeled. So they need multiple opportunities to engage with a text, to see it modeled with prosodic, accurate, automatic reading, and then multiple opportunities to practice that in order to become successful as fluent readers. So in order for us to provide solid fluency instruction to our students, that systematic, explicit instruction that they need, we have to be knowledgeable and skilled in providing every aspect of literacy instruction, including fluency instruction. The curriculum that we're using with them, whether that is a curriculum like you have in front of you, Rite Flight, where it's set out for you, or where you have the skill set to go and develop your own curriculum, it should be research-based, and it should also be systematic in terms of the scope and sequence of that curriculum. And of course, your students need adequate resources in order to have those multiple opportunities to practice. Because they do need multiple opportunities for practice, we want to provide them appropriate leveled materials. We want them practicing at their reading level and engaging in a wide variety of texts to engage their interest, to build their vocabulary, and to give them those multiple opportunities for practice. So the texts provide opportunities to practice their decoding skills. We do want to encourage them to attend to the words on the page rather than to guess out of context, particularly as we're working on building their accuracy levels to that above 95% threshold. And we don't want them to guess based on the context of the sentence. The context of the sentence will mislead you 75% of the time. So that's not a skill that we want to encourage them to start practicing. We really want them to attend to that letter-sound relationship, the syllable type, the phoneme grapheme correspondence. So we want them in texts that offer them the opportunity to practice what they are proficient at, and also give them the opportunity to practice what they're receiving instruction in. And I think I've just mentioned this, but their practice should be at their reading level, and they should be monitored at their reading level rather than their grade level. They are where they are instructionally, and so if you have a fifth grader who's reading on a third grade reading level, that is the material in which that student needs to practice. And of course, we as educators want to provide reading material that's of interest to them, that they can engage in. And we live in such a wonderfully literate society now with so many books being published all of the time that becomes an easier task to engage in. But we do want to make sure that the text that we're giving them to practice in is approachable for that student, meaning it is highly decodable for that particular student. So fluency practices that have been demonstrated to improve the fluency of students include repeated reading, guided oral reading, paired oral reading. Each of these offers the student multiple opportunities for practice, and appropriate modeling of text and scaffolding for reading is necessary for each of these practices. And of course, we always want to provide the student with immediate corrective feedback, even as they are reading out loud to us in fluency passages. We never want to let the student practice an incorrect skill. We want to consolidate correct information, not consolidate incorrect information. So we do want to stop them and to correct them and have them repeat the correct version of whatever it is they decoded. And I know when you're doing a time fluency read for your progress monitoring, that might not always be possible, but as soon as you finish that fluency read, you do want to go back and provide the correct information for them, to give them the correct information as quickly as possible as they're practicing fluency. So repeated reading. In repeated reading, the student reads the same text multiple times. So of course, the first time they read it, it's a cold read. This may be a practice that you're familiar with through the RTI process as you're building fluency in your classrooms. You're working on a passage, you read it on Monday as a cold read, you get your rate, they read it over the course of the week to improve on it, and hopefully do improve on it, and then you're taking your warm reading on Friday to see their rate of improvement. You should, again, be providing them immediate corrective feedback, particularly when you're not looking for that baseline score or the final score, all of those opportunities in between. You do want to be providing them feedback on the reading. So the teacher is modeling that reading so that they can hear what that passage is read like with fluency. Then the student has multiple opportunities to engage in that practice activity. So we know that when we intervene prior to the third grade in fluency, we do see moderate improvement in fluency through fluency intervention. After the third grade, as students get older, it becomes harder and harder to move fluency. However, we should still be providing that intervention. They're certainly not going to go out and achieve better fluency on their own without educators to lead them down the path. So we want to keep them engaged in the process of reading to encourage that independent wide reading and fluency practice even as they progress up through the grades. For guided oral reading, rather than reading the same text repeatedly and marking your improvement on it, the student reads different text, perhaps even a longer text, pieces of a longer text going through. Again, the teacher is providing immediate corrective feedback. And again, we do see moderate improvement in fluency in early grades. We also see some comprehension development with this particular practice because we are not limiting them to one passage read repeatedly, but to many passages read over the course of time. So they're receiving exposure to greater vocabulary knowledge and hopefully building those background knowledge, the background knowledge and the comprehension processes as we go through. And then with paired oral reading, student reads the same text multiple times, but they alternate this reading with listening to a fluent reader read that text, whether that's the teacher or an audio recording or perhaps a more advanced student, if you have that situation in a workable fashion in your instructional environment. Again, whoever is listening, whether it's the more fluent reader or the teacher, they're providing that immediate corrective feedback. Emative reading, this can be very useful for improving prosody, particular where they're listening to the phrasing, where they're listening to the rhythm of the fluent reader read, and they're imitating the production of that. So that not only gives them the model for what fluent reading sounds like, but it also encourages those comprehension processes to kick into play. And it improves both rate and prosody. So fluency instruction should be focused, direct, and systematic. Students should complete those timed repeated readings so we'll know if they're improving. It is helpful for them not only to get feedback on both their accuracy, but also feedback on their prosody. And sometimes that looks like giving them specific physical markers to pause in the text, either a short pause for a comma or a hard stop, a longer pause for for a period at the end of the sentence, for grouping phrases together so they can visually see where those boundaries are and encourage them to read with prosody and foster their comprehension in that respect. But for them to graph their own progress, I know that's probably a very common practice to have them chart their progress, so hopefully they can see their gains and be engaged and motivated by seeing their achievements grow, with repeated reading particularly. And we always want to continue to move them along. So as they master their current level of reading, we want to add slightly more complex text for them to practice with so we can continue to engage them in increasingly complex text and help them to master text until we get them on grade level where they should be and advance their reading fluency. So when we consider prosody, accuracy, and automaticity as part of the reading fluency puzzle, we also need to remember that comprehension monitoring should be a part of fluency instruction. So it's just something as simple as asking them a question about what they read after they've read the fluency passage can help shift that focus from words correct per minute to what the true goal of reading fluently is, which is to understand what you've read. So again, those students, they learn the name of the game quickly when it comes to fluency practice. So anything that we can do to shift them away from, I just need to spit out as many words as I can in order to hit that words correct per minute, and then I don't have to do this anymore, that's not really to their benefit. And that's, a practice that our students often adopt. They've learned the tricks. They know how to fly underneath the radar. So we always want to encourage them to attend to what they're reading, to pull comprehension out of it. And we can do that, again, with simple practices, asking them questions about what they just read, even on a very short passage. We do want accuracy, automaticity, and prosody to work together to achieve the goal of reading, to pull meaning off of the printed page. And by focusing on each of those things, rather than just the one thing, I think that we can build both our students' reading fluency and then ultimately their comprehension in reading. You guys have any questions for me? And you have a long time to ask them, so generate some.
A couple. The one thing, well, a couple things that caught my attention. One, you mentioned somewhere on one slide about not using a guess based on context. Yes. And I've always thought that that's very appropriate whenever a student has specific impediments to decoding, that they're using strategies that work for them versus, really just berating something that's really hard for them.
The problem is that particularly as students increase in grade level and the pictures go away from books and there are no visual cues as to what the correct word might be. And if we're not using those highly predictable texts, which are really the foundation of that guessing from context, when something's very predictable, it's very easy to guess from context what the next word should be. That doesn't help them when they get into a text where that skill is not applicable, where they can't really figure it out from context. And again, just from a numbers, right? If you're betting with the house, then that's betting against yourself, because 75% of the time that strategy will not work for them. And it'll lead to comprehension deficits because they're supplying the wrong word. And you won't know they're supplying the wrong word because most of the time they're not reading out loud to you, they're reading in their head. They've supplied the wrong word and they keep on going because that's the strategy they've been taught. So we really do want to encourage them to attend to decoding the text accurately, rather than just hoping they come up with the right word and keeping on. Because, when they're younger, you're right, they'll come up with mom for mother, right? They'll decode that successfully, but when they get into those more complicated texts, they just don't have that advantage that's given to us from pictures and predictability. So it might help them in the short term to do what you suggest, but in the long term, we really want them to build that decoding skill up.
It's interesting, and I feel like all things are the balance, and I'm sure that's, just assume that we understand that. I just know that I learned to speak German in Germany, and with high school level text, and I know that it really was something I had to do. And I think that a lot of readers, when I'm working with struggling readers, I think of that experience, and I think that's something that they feel like they have to do. And so, the text that I work with obviously didn't have pictures in high school.
Right.
So I just think that it is an important strategy that I wouldn't want to try to extinguish. Maybe I would go back and require them to also work on decoding, but not, discourage them from using that.
There's an important piece of what you just said, though. We have to remember that when we talk about struggling readers, they have an atypical form of language development, which has been well documented through a tremendous amount of research. So as you're learning a second language with the development of your language thing, you have essential language skills that are developing at the age of 1 with learning how to get the phonemic structure of our language, which we actually differentiate phonemes across language and actually turn off hearing certain categories of phonemes before we're even 8 months old. An individual who has been distinguished perhaps from a language-based learning difference does not have that same development trajectory. So what would be a sufficient scaffold for you as a typical developing individual may not, and the research suggests would not be a benefit to somebody else. The heartwarming thing for me as a researcher is that of the kids who struggle with reading, we know how to help 95% of them. People like me who struggle to find out why we have those 5% left out of those bucket of just 5% of our population, we're really looking at the fine-grained aspects of language development in the brain and development trajectory. So while you probably have a skill that works for many, when we talk about the few, that some of us and many of us, I think, in this room deal with and care with, it makes a big difference. So, I mean, that would be my one point, because you're exactly right. In your context, that would probably be very useful for you. So I appreciate the question.
Any other questions? Yes.
I've always had students who read beautifully fluent and didn't know what they read after they finished that.
That's a different topic. Yes, so word callers, the students who can read beautifully and fluently and accurately, and then don't understand what they read. So when we think about reading comprehension abilities, so we have decoding. If we want to go back to the simple view of reading, we have decoding on one side of the puzzle, and then we have oral language skills on the other side of the grid, rather. And oral language skills are typically what underlie those particular deficits in comprehension processes. So it's often vocabulary that contributes to it, background knowledge that contributes to it, experience with reading, and then, yes, executive function, holding those propositions in their mind in order to construct text meaning from it, yes. But it's a different process. Absolutely, those people exist. But. Any other questions? Yes.
So early in the conference, you may be getting to this, but you were talking about how important it is to, at the end of your presentation, to make sure to link the fluency to comprehension and do things that will help them. And you mentioned asking questions. I'm just hoping we end up with sort of a bulleted list of things that can help with that. And one thing that it seems like an obvious thing that most of us have to do, which I think is problematic, is cut them off at a minute. I mean, because most of the kids, there are people like training them that part that you read is all that's important. And then the questions that we ask afterwards are about the text that they never got to.
Right, yes.
So it seems like that's something that even if it's go read the rest independently or something, that has to be a critical part of what we're doing every time we're progress monitoring in order to not train them to not worry about what it means.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. So they're reading this much of the text and you're asking them questions about this much of the text. So as a teacher, thinking on your feet to generate a question about what they actually read rather than...
Well, and I think they have to read the rest.
Well, they do have to read the rest of it, but for time's sake, for what you're saying, you're in the middle of progress monitoring, you're trying to get your data point, but you also want to always link back to comprehension. So they read 3 sentences, what can you ask them about those 3 sentences? Just to make that connection. And then of course we want them to read all of the text, maybe not on the progress monitoring passages, but all of the text generally speaking, to always link that back. And I think you will get the pieces of the puzzle over the next 2 days. You had a question?
I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on the correlation between solid grammar skills and reading comprehension. Because I find that there was a question over here about, students that read so fluently and have that softly and all the things, but if they don't understand parts of speech and don't understand basic fundamental grammar, I find that, that's where a lot of that comes from.
Certainly syntax and grammar feed into comprehension, and again, that's under that oral language umbrella. Are they speaking with the correct syntax and grammar? You might find deficits there, and so those skills specifically would need to be remediated.
Programs around the basic grammar for them, is that recommended?
there's a list of programs that provide that explicit systematic instruction in grammar and syntax and breaks it apart for them, uses color coding strategies and sorting strategies to really make that knowledge explicit for them, because students with learning disabilities don't always have that knowledge implicitly the way that fluent speakers and readers do. Yes. Yep. You're welcome. Other questions? Yes.
We do have, we use Aspire curriculum.
Yes.
And they have opportunities for you to start. They're relying on the stories on their level. And typically, I work with third graders, fourth graders. They don't have level readers on their level to go on with any curriculum materials. Any source for that? To get readers on that level, if they're in first grade level or third grade,
Right.
there's not material. I don't have any.
Other than dropping back to your lower grade teachers and borrowing their resources, I think that would be the most direct way. I would also use perhaps a Lexile tool to generate a list of readers that would be on their level that they might find more engaging than those typical leveled readers. Does that make sense? We have a list. There we go. Yes, we do have that list. Great. Any other questions? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Hirschman.